Old Man Turner had been placing the same scarecrow in his field every fall for as long as anyone in Cedar Hills could remember. The scarecrow was a cruel thing, a tattered plaited shirt, a dusty straw hat, and pants stuffed with hay. Its face was a burlap sack stitched with 2 buttons for eyes and a stitched grin that almost looked smudged. Each year he would drive a wooden post into the ground in the middle of his field, hoist the scarecrow onto it, and secure it there to keep the crows away. But this year something was different. The scarecrow had been around for generations, a hand-me-down from Turner's father and supposedly his grandfather. Some people in the town said the scarecrow was cursed, that it once belonged to a drifter who vanished on the farm decades ago. The story went that a drifter's spirit lived in the scarecrow, waiting for a chance to get revenge on whoever disturbed it. Turner laughed off the legend. He was a practical man and didn't have time for ghost stories. Just a bunch of straw and cloth, he muttered, as he positioned the scarecrow in the field one chilly October evening. But that night as he lay in bed, he heard something strange. It was a faint rustling, like the sound of footsteps shuffling through the field. He brushed it off as the wind and went back to sleep. The next morning he went out to check on the scarecrow, but when he reached the field, his heart skipped a beat. The scarecrow had moved. It was no longer facing the road. As he left it, it was turned facing the house. Turner frowned, trying to figure out what could have caused it to move. Maybe the wind, he thought, though there hadn't been much of a breeze. He shook his head, turned the scarecrow back to face the road, and went about his day not giving it another thought. But that night the rustling came again, louder this time, like slow, deliberate footsteps. Turner sat up in bed, listening as the sound stopped right outside his window. He peered through the curtains, but all he could see was the dark shape of the scarecrow standing in the field, seemingly in the same place he left it. Yet the next morning it had moved again. This time it was angled slightly to the right, as if it was turning toward the house. Turner's stomach twisted, but he told himself it was just his imagination. He dragged the scarecrow back to the original spot, hammering the post deeper into the ground to make sure it stayed put. But the following night he woke up to the sound of something scraping against his front porch. Heart pounding, he crept to the door and looked outside. There in the moonlight, he could see a figure in the field. It was the scarecrow, no longer on its post, standing on its own 2 feet, facing the house with that twisted, stitched grin. Turner slammed the door and locked it. His heart racing, he spent the rest of the night sitting up in his chair, clutching his shotgun, his eyes never leaving the window. But by dawn, when he finally dared to check, the scarecrow was back on its post, looking as if it had never moved at all. That day he went into town, telling a few neighbors about what he had seen, hoping they'd laugh and tell him it was all in his head. But instead, they exchanged uneasy glances. "Maybe it's time to get rid of that scarecrow, Turner," said one older man in the diner. "That thing has been around longer than any of us. You don't know what's in it." Turner scoffed. "You're all as superstitious as a bunch of school kids." But as the day wore on, the nervous looks of his neighbors stayed with him. That night he decided he'd get rid of the scarecrow for good. As the sun began to set, he grabbed a can of gasoline and a box of matches, stomping out to the field with determination. "I've had enough of this nonsense," he muttered.